Greetings, this is Celia Roberts calling from Paonia, Colorado, and I am welcoming all of you who have joined this gathering in Miami, Florida. Thanks for coming, and I hope you appreciate and enjoy the following presentation. This is a journey for me in terms of my life's work, photographing our nation's farm workers for the last 22 years. The image is when I was probably 5 years old. You can see the strap around my neck, and I would bet that that was my very first camera, Kodak reflex camera. At that age, I sort of got a message from my father at some point, which was that really whatever I did with my life wasn't going to make a big difference. I don't know where I picked up that message, but it lasted for quite a while until I quit teaching math and decided to do what I really wanted to do, follow my passion of being a photographer. And at that point, I realized that I had made that belief up, that my life could make a contribution, and I'm sure the same holds for you. Our travels seem to take us to places that we couldn't imagine as children. So this next photograph is of myself with a beautiful child that was in northern New York State at a Migrant Head Start program that's in Mount Morris, New York. And this is followed by another photograph of myself at my first migrant camp. An interesting realization that these people really are limited in terms of their housing, in terms of their health needs, in terms of decent pay. And it inspired me to keep after this work until I felt like I had covered the ground well enough to have a good understanding of what their lives were like. I'm going to feature different crops in the fields and orchards. It's sort of been a passion of mine since this project began to really cover as many different types of foods as possible in the agricultural industry, which depend on hand labor to harvest the food. The first one is one of my early and very favorite photographs. It was a man tossing broccoli. This is a cabbage harvest in California, and an opportunity to see that hardworking people deserve time off. This is a celery harvest in New York State, cleaning carrots in California, a whole family participating in an apple harvest in my part of the state, hydroponic tomatoes, strawberries, green tomatoes in Florida because they're harvested when they're green. This is grapes in Paonia, clipping onions in eastern Colorado, families working together, young boy daydreaming, young girl helping her family harvest onions, and another onion harvest in northern Mexico. This is an older woman harvesting zinnia seeds and the stoop labor that it takes to harvest strawberries. And this is more strawberries in California. People who do sometimes find joy in what they're doing, even though it's hard work. This is an orange harvest. It's a stretch to imagine how hard it is to do this labor. Little play on words there. More oranges, lots of oranges. This is blueberries. Not so many blueberries. It seemed to be a bit dry there, but this is a group of women who are taking a break from a blueberry patch. This is ferns being harvested also in Florida, and a large canopied area for growing the fern, and then their use in arranging flowers in the work area. And this is a cabbage harvest and sorting procedure in west of Fort Lauderdale. This is the beginning of a trip I took one morning, very early, to a tomato harvest outside of Immokalee. Men who have to line up to get their numbers for the day so they can keep track of how many pounds they harvest. Each bucket is about a 40-pound bucket, so it's quite a strenuous job. Amazing, actually, that there are women involved. This was a woman, Hefe they call, which is most unusual. She was sort of head of that group, team, and this is her again at the head of the line of men getting their checks. Here's another gentleman checking to make sure he got the right amount of money. Town photo of Immokalee. I really like this town. It's such an authentic town. This is a reminder that we should be grateful when we're being stuck behind a truck, because that truck is holding our food. These are onions being harvested by young people in northern Mexico in the state of Sonora. This is a bean sorting arrangement and more packing shed work. This is a very large place in Washington state, and the end of a parsley harvest in California near Oxnard. Women with ankle bracelets. This is a luncheon place in Sonora, Mexico, for people who have been caught crossing the border. This gentleman, who I really had a nice connection with, was determined to try it again, as many of them do. Very dangerous position to take, but they do give it many tries when they need to. These are border photographs. The first one was outside of Sonora, Mexico. This one is south of San Diego at a place called International Friendship Park. Odd name. This little child greeting her father, who is living in Mexico. She's living in the U.S. Now, this particular section, I'm going to slow down a little bit and read a piece that I wrote at a literary event here in my hometown, trying to introduce people here even to what it's like to be in the fields. So, awakening my senses. It was hot that June morning, the first day I ever walked into a field to photograph farm workers. Hot and dusty. The campesinos, as they're called in Spanish, were hoeing onions, little green sprouts in perfect rows, sharing their space with unruly young weeds, ready to outgrow their onion neighbors if they weren't taken out first by a hefty hoe. Actually, this hoe is called a short hoe. It's now outlawed, but they used to be used a lot by the children who were working in the fields. As it turns out, I have visited many fields since that first day in 1992. I've learned to appreciate the smell of hot sun in the midst of a late July corn harvest in western Colorado. Also, I've become accustomed to the scent of rain, which at this point showed up unexpectedly on a Mother's Day harvest of cantaloupe near McAllen, Texas, where pickers had to stop and dash to their battered cars with broken windshields in order to wait out the quick midday downpour. And of course, the fragrance of fruit. Fruit being picked by migrant workers across the country. Strawberries left underfoot by men and women bent close to the rich East Tennessee soil, tenderly plucking those luscious red berries hiding under furry leaves. And ripe peaches, fallen from heavy laden branches in JJ's orchard here at home. Peaches so lush that I was compelled to brush off a golden orb from under a tree and savor its sweet flavor that otherwise would have gone unnoticed. Apples. Apples dropped into buckets slung across the strong shoulders of sure-footed workers atop very tall ladders in western state apple orchards. joking amongst themselves about this strange little gringa lady wanting to take their photos. And now blueberries, gleefully plucked by young and old alike, on a U-Pick farm in upstate New York, a place unknown to me, had it not been for a dear Mennonite family I had met the day before at a local farmer's market. All of these memories, yet nothing was ever more memorable than walking into a field of celery east of Oxnard, California. Machetes flashing in the sun, wielded by men working so swiftly with their blades that it made me catch my breath in fear for their very flesh. Instantly, however, that changed when I began to walk in for a closer look, struck by the lime green leaves waving madly in the wind as if to say, "Take me, take me." How could I have missed it until then? The crunch, crunch, crunch. All of us walking on discarded outer celery stalks, the part that no one I know would ever consider buying in a grocery store. In an instant, my nose took over for my photo taking. Crushed celery. Who would have ever thought? As pungent an aroma as I had ever experienced. Unforgettable. Now, today, just thinking about those lime green leaves and flashing blades and crunchy footsteps, it all comes back. That celery scent which continued to call me on to other fields and other orchards and other labor camps, connecting ever so briefly with farm workers and their families. A nod, a smile, a wave, a sense of gratitude for all of these experiences that were enhanced by my sense of sight, sound, taste, touch, smell. More so, however, a deep sense of gratitude for their labor, since it is their labor, in the end, that provides the food that nourishes and sustains us and enables us to flourish through all of our senses. So now we come to the families. And I have to say that I never really knew the power of family until I started photographing farm worker families. We weren't terribly close in my family. Our basic needs were met, but I didn't know what it really meant to be family, to be open in our communications with one another and to show signs of affection. I've discovered something with the mostly Mexican population. When they're in the public, they don't seem to show a lot of affection for one another. But when they're in their homes, it's a whole different experience. They are so dear with one another. They seem to be so connected. Now, in this case, the children sometimes are a little hesitant when I come on the scene. They're not quite sure who I am, but they really do have their own personalities and certainly are adored by their parents and grandparents. This young lad had something in mind. He wanted his granddad to make sure that he got his shoes tied correctly. It seemed like he really was interested in learning how to do it himself until he sort of collapsed into his settee, so to speak. The cardboard box wasn't quite big enough to take the weight of this little child who was obviously growing. But again, always a sign of appreciation and connection between generations. Now, I couldn't resist photographing this pair because they were just so sweet with each other. This child, obviously curious about what's down in there, then that shirt, granddad, and then abuelo, I guess he would say. And then, of course, I want to see what's in your mouth, which made me think perhaps Grandpa had false teeth. Grandmother, she was quite a corker. Obviously, a really hard worker, very proud of her plants around her home. Obviously, terribly fond of the grandchild. And I will take a moment here to say that this family had been affected by deportation policies way back in the 90s. I think I took this photograph in 1995. The parents had been deported because of lack of papers. The grandfather, had been one of the lucky ones who was allowed to stay. I can't remember what they called those fellows. An earlier generation, when we really needed them, they were allowed to stay legally. And so this family, as so many hundreds and thousands of families these days, are being broken up by the lack of a decent and just immigration policy. Again, little bits of affection with family members. And then, as I often felt with families, by the time it was time to go, I was one of them. Just incredibly wonderful people. It's a little hard for me to leave these folks because I know that I will never see them again. But those experiences have stayed with me. And it has changed my life. There's no question. My heart has been opened by the farm worker community in a way that I never knew it wasn't open until I spent quite a bit of time with them over the years. And during that time, there were ceremonies that I was unfamiliar with. This is a First Communion at a little small Catholic church in Olathe, Colorado, which is down the road from me a piece in western Colorado. This is a quinceañera, a traditional honoring of young women, the passage at the age of 15. Beautiful dresses, a really beautiful ceremony. Very important in their culture. This is another interesting Dia del Niño event that was in northern Mexico, in Sonora, state of Sonora, Mexico. One thing that's very dear about this photograph is that the young lad on the left lost his belt before he went on the stage, and he managed to get through this entire dance without missing a step. And it was just a treat to see these kids so enthralled and so excited about what they were doing that they didn't care if they lost their belt. It was really a great day. Many, many performances by these kids from rural areas in that part of Sonora. This is a traditional piñata event, trying to break the piñata. They let the little ones usually go first. The hard part about this piece is that kids want to get involved, and it's hard to keep them back in line. This is another event that I came across. It's not an event. It was actually an experience that I witness quite often with families. They're very generous with each other. This particular small group had been caught in a wicked hurricane down in Miami in the 90s. Some of you may remember it. I don't have the name in my head, but they knew a small family in the San Luis Valley of Colorado, and they were welcomed back into their very small home as one family in order to start over again because they had lost everything in the hurricane. So it was a real privilege to be there and share those sweet moments with these guys. This woman lived in, it's along the coast of Mexico. It's not coming to my mind right now, but all of her family had moved to Olathe, except for this one granddaughter. Obviously, as many families do, in order to make more money, their salary is generally about 10 times what it is working on farms in Mexico. In Mexico, they make about $10 a day. Here, they make usually about $10 an hour. This woman hadn't seen her children or grandchildren in a number of years. She had never seen one of her grandchildren, and I was able to connect with the family before I left. the local family. I was able to photograph this family and took images down so that this grandmother, abuela, could visit with her family via photographs. Again, another camp photo noting that the children generally are well behaved, even when their parents aren't around. Many times these kids are in Migrant Head Start programs, which is a blessing for the whole culture, and I will talk more about Migrant Head Start shortly. This young fellow had just arrived in this camp in the San Luis Valley. He knew no one, came with very few items of his own in hopes of finding work. This is when these young people are challenged by being away from their support group, from their family. And it often leads to being in gangs in the cities because that's a form of support for them. Another place that the younger kids find to sleep is in makeshift hammocks in the camps. I just found out recently we have outlawed these makeshift little beds, and that has its plus and minuses because it was a way to have children have their own spot to sleep. And in this case, this child seemed perfectly content to be in the hammock. This experience came at a camp in outside of Hood River, Oregon. The little boy started crying when I arrived, and I realized at that point he was probably afraid. He didn't know who I was. I think when strangers come into their territory, it's a challenge for the children who might not understand that some of us are there for their benefit. So here's my little section about Migrant Head Start. Migrant Head Start program is probably one of the finest programs the government funds. I am crazy about this program because it provides an education to children who are pre-first grade. And they take the children, I think it's starting at the first year, but they are in a really healthy educational environment up until age 5. And then at age 6, of course, they start first grade. This photograph was taken in a little community south of Phoenix called Queen Creek. Actually, it was a small community when I went there at this point, which again was in the 90s. There are photographs that I have taken of this program. I think it was in around 2005, 2006, and the program had increased a lot because the surrounding area had increased a lot. In terms of population, this was taken the same day. Little young fellow, obviously a budding artist. I was impressed with how often these children are encouraged to engage in art. Makes a big difference when they're little. This photograph was taken in Hillsboro, Oregon. And this one was from Immokalee, Florida. They have a beautiful Migrant Head Start program there. And I discovered at this point how wonderful it was to be around the teachers as well as the kids. Many of the teachers are very animated. They have tons of energy, and many of them were migrant kids themselves. They were able to get a college education and have gotten back into the program as teachers in order to give back to their own culture. This young child was in a program in Albion, New York, upstate New York, as was this little fellow. Actually, it might be a little girl. Not quite sure. This little one is being assisted by another. I don't think she was a teacher. They have assistants that work within the program as well. And this is a young mom at a program in South Bay, Florida. This was her firstborn, and she was obviously very proud of her baby. She had picked the baby up after working in the fields all day, and obviously delighted to have family in her arms, her child in her arms. And this little one was a boy who came from Myanmar, formerly Burma. They moved a number of families from refugee camps in northern Thailand to Delta, Colorado. And so obviously it was a whole new culture for these children. Some of them seemed very well adjusted, and yet some of them were obviously in a state of shock, many of them having been born in these refugee camps in Thailand. I was very touched by this child who was sort of daydreaming on her own at this Migrant Head Start Center. The first time I ever went into a Migrant Head Start program was in Olathe, and I've always loved this photograph. Mostly these children are extremely well behaved. I rarely see kids acting out in the programs, and I just love this photograph. It just gives me such delight because there's so many wonderful different expressions on the children's faces. Rarely, hang on. Sorry, I forgot to turn off my phone. Didn't see very many men in the programs. The ones who are there are obviously just as devoted to these children as are the women. This photograph was taken in another program in northern part of Florida. Often the kids to come in, they're not quite sure what to do with a fork. I loved it. There was so much patience with the teachers showing them how to use utensils. There was another one, not sure which fork and which utensil I'm supposed to use. This is back to the program in Queen Creek, Arizona. Lots of music introduced into the programs. Much of the music they create themselves. A lot of rhythm, dance, just a lot of joy in the programs. You can see it on the kids' faces here. And even on the playgrounds, it's interesting to see how much they interact with each other on the playgrounds. I rarely saw children off by themselves. They were almost always included in little groups and given attention when they need it. They're sensitive children, just like all kids. These young kids were cousins in a program in the Dalles, Oregon, waiting for one of the parents to come up and pick them up after being in the field again all day. Or orchards, as a matter of fact. I think that was what was going on in Oregon. More playground photos. You can see why I like being with these kiddos. You can't help but feeling joyful when they seem so joyful. And appreciative. This was a little morning break with watermelon at a program in near Eagle Pass, Colorado. Eagle Pass, Texas. This is a playground photograph from that same center in Eagle Pass, Texas. And a family night there as well. Lots of effort by these programs to have families engaged in the child's education. This sort of encouragement really benefits the kids down the road, having family support all the way through school, whether it's Migrant Head Start or when they get into high school. This little gathering happened in South Bay just before I forgot about this one. I love this photograph. They were on a little walk, and then a number of them got to go on a field trip to Lion Country Safari, and lots of excitement because they knew they were going to get to see wild animals. It was sponsored by the East Coast Migrant Head Start program, which oversees a number of programs on the East Coast. This little lad had just gotten into the program that day. He was a refugee from Jamaica, an immigrant, I should say, and he didn't speak English, but was absolutely wide-eyed and enthused the whole day long. I was so glad I was able to get that expression on his face, because that's where he was all day, just in awe. This was at that same Line Country Safari where kids were watching. I think it was captured an injured eagle of some sort, and a demonstration which really caught their attention. All eyes, all ears. Well-behaved kids. Here they were circling up, do a little dance before they got back on their bus to go back to South Bay. This was a cover of one of the calendars that I published. And a final farewell smile that will touch pretty much anybody's heart. Great kids. Now we have a few photographs that were taken during at migrant education programs. Migrant education is a program for children who move into first grade and goes all the way through the 12th grade. So the first time I was introduced to it was in a place called Douglas, Arizona. This was not in Douglas, however. This was across the border in a community called Agua Prieta in Sonora, Mexico. This was a dwelling of two girls and their father, obviously built by hand. The young one met me at the door. The younger daughter met me at the door, and when I came in, the older sister was working diligently at her homework, and I got the feeling that this girl was going to succeed no matter what. She didn't have the advantage of a migrant ed program, but she was in school, and there was a determination there that I know is often needed in order for any of us to succeed. This was a picture of a young lad just starting in first grade. It was in Williams, or Northern California. Great program set up for parents, for moms, to learn how to cook U.S. food. Actually, no, it was more like sharing their Mexican recipes in this small community, and it was attended by a lot of very enthusiastic moms. This was at graduation of a migrant education program in Olathe, Colorado again. Many of these kids have done well in school, but they may not be able to go on to college due to a lack of documentation, as was the case with this young woman. She had arrived at this high school 4 years early, not one word of English, and she graduated with honors. She was able to get a one-year scholarship at Mesa State in Denver, and then had to drop out of advanced studies because there were no scholarships available for youth without proper documentation. That's not always the case in every state, but in many states it is the case. This is a really nice sequence, I think. I hope you enjoy it. It's called Serving Those Who Serve, and those who serve I consider to be those who harvest our food. May you enjoy it. This was taken at a soup kitchen in Immokalee. Always a lot of gratitude. These men come in during the middle of the day and have a really good hot meal. This piece was taken also in Immokalee at the Coalition of Immokalee Workers. I have to brag about these guys. They have done an amazing job at generating more income for themselves and those in the tomato picking business. Actually, these fellows had just arrived in Immokalee and would be seeking work in the tomato fields. That same program, Coalition of Immokalee Workers, has started their own radio station, and they are able to reach out to the farm working community throughout southern Florida. So it was very impressive to see what they had been able to accomplish in terms of increasing communication amongst their workers and their families. They had very successfully, over the years, increased their pay by 1 penny a pound of tomatoes being harvested. And when you consider that a bucket of tomatoes weighs about 40 pounds. That's 40 cents every bucket they turn in, so it adds up in the end. This is these are signs that came from a march against rats, can't remember the name of the company. I do know that everybody they have boycotted or encouraged boycotts against, except Wendy's. They have succeeded in gaining this penny a pound increase in their pay, and Taco Bell was one of them. So the march that I participated in Albuquerque was against Taco Bell. This is a food bank in Immokalee. Lots of work in that community. Lots of farm workers in that community. I cannot tell you how many bags they set out that day. This is one of the recipients, an abuela, who lived in Immokalee and was surrounded by great-grandkids and her favorite little pet. She was a delight. Spoke no English, of course, but had worked in the fields all of her life. This is a health fair in Fort Myers over in the West Coast. It's important for the workers to have some sort of monitoring of their health, blood pressure, blood tests for diabetes, etc. It's really good that health services are offered throughout the country for this population. Minimal housing, I must say, in most communities. This again was in Immokalee. And this is a group of seniors who came out to Immokalee to go on a tour of housing, and probably went out into the fields as well. I encourage any of you to go on a tour if you can. It's truly eye-opening. What you'll discover is that the workers are unbelievably gifted in their ability to harvest food. They have been doing it since they're children, and they have I want to call it a talent. They are able to work at speeds and in heat in areas that we as a population of people who've never had to go into this work could never accomplish. It's very impressive. And so this was one of the tours that was taking place in Immokalee. I also want to say thank you to these women who serve as directors of the Migrant Head Start program in Florida. This was taken in 2005, and I'm not sure if any of these women are with the program still, but they were committed for many, many years to the young kids in those programs. This is to acknowledge the hands that take the beating, that harvest the food that ends up on our tables. So we have a lot to be grateful for. Now, this is a little sequence of images just to remind us of the food that has been harvested, and it will be more at an automated tempo. So here we go. The fields as they're planted, the little plants before they go out into the fields. And then the food as it ends up on the shelves of our grocery stores and in farm markets that are happening all over the country now. I love these photographs. It shows how much we have to be grateful for. So thanks to the many. These are headshots that represent the millions of workers that end up in the fields every day. I'm not going to tell you where they're from, but I think you'll get a sense of how wonderful this culture is and the many gifts they offer us. This young girl who lived on the Mexican side of the border near Nogales had done a beautiful little portrait that I want to, poster that I wanted to read to you. It says, I can't read the first word.
Little Virgin.
No, little virgin, yes. Thank you. Little virgin, please be mindful to all the kids of the world. Virgincita, that's the word. I love the photo. She was a delightful child. And this is a hand-painted mural on the one of the walls in Immokalee, and to me it speaks the truth. If you want peace, work for justice. One last little PS that I just added to this slideshow is a ladder. Now, this ladder to me symbolizes the fact that I think these people are so worthy. They should be at the top of what we call the ladder rather than at the bottom of the ladder. Thanks for watching. I hope you've appreciated the presentation. Have a wonderful time. Adios.